All right, you've built your Texas LLC, and now it's time to grow. Maybe you're bringing on a new investor, rewarding a key employee with some equity, or officially partnering up to take your business to that next level. Honestly, it's an incredible milestone. But making this structural change to your company involves navigating a very specific mix of internal documents, state filings, and federal tax rules. And if you do it wrong, you could face tax headaches, administrative rejections, or even lose your corporate liability shield entirely. So how exactly do you add a member to your Texas LLC seamlessly and compliantly? Well, you're in the right place, because in this explainer, I'm going to walk you through exactly how to do it.
Now, right off the bat, let's shatter a massive misconception that trips up almost every single new business owner. Do you think that adding a partner means you have to immediately rush to file paperwork with the Texas Secretary of State to update your ownership records? Actually, you might be surprised to hear this, but the Texas Secretary of State doesn't track LLC ownership at all. They really don't. They don't maintain a public registry of your members. They basically only track your registered agent and your initial managers or members from the exact day you were formed. So if the state doesn't track your ownership, who does? And where do you actually go to make these changes?
Okay, let's dive straight into our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to break this down into 3 simple layers: internal, state, and federal. We'll cover the internal operating agreement, state filings in Form 424, the public information report, IRS rules and tax status, updating the responsible party, and finally, a brief legal disclaimer.
Section 1, the Internal Operating Agreement. Let's start with Layer 1, which is arguably the most important bucket of work, because this is where your business legally transforms. To really grasp this, we need to compare your 2 main company documents. First, you have your Certificate of Formation. In Texas, you can really just think of this as your LLC's birth certificate. It simply reflects who was in charge at the exact moment the entity was created. It's an external public document. But then you have your operating agreement, or company agreement as it's often called down in Texas. This one is internal. It's completely private, and it is the definitive living record of who currently owns the company. When you're making changes, this is the document your bank and your new partner will actually care about.
There is a great concept under the Texas Business Organizations Code that says an LLC is fundamentally a creature of contract. What that actually means for you is that Texas law gives owners massive, almost total freedom to customize their internal governance. You aren't boxed into rigid corporate structures here. Because the state grants you this incredible flexibility, your internal operating agreement is legally binding and absolutely crucial. It is literally the rulebook for your business. So, when you're adding a member, this contract is the very first thing you must consult and modify.
So how does that flexibility translate to reality? According to the statutory defaults, formally authorizing a new member internally requires a pretty precise sequence. First up, check your existing agreement. Does it have a right of first refusal or a right of first offer? If it does, your existing members might actually have the right to buy equity before it's ever offered to an outsider. Next, under Texas default rules, you have to get the unanimous consent of all existing members to admit a new member with full voting rights, unless your specific agreement says otherwise. And finally, you have to formally amend the operating agreement in writing to reflect the new members, their roles, and everyone's new ownership percentages.
Now, you might be thinking, hey, can't we just shake hands on this and not write it down? Honestly, please, do not do that. If your agreement is silent, or if you don't even have a written agreement at all, the state steps in with default rules. And here is a massive trap. Without a written agreement, Texas law allocates profits and losses based on the agreed value of each member's capital contribution, not an automatic 50-50 split. Just imagine putting $90,000 into starting the business while your new partner puts in $10,000, only to realize later that you accidentally agreed to split the profits evenly. You absolutely must explicitly contract for this in writing.
Section 2, State Filings and Form 424. With the internal private paperwork sorted out, let's transition to the second layer of our roadmap, dealing with the state of Texas.
So when do you actually need to file an amendment with the state? Remember earlier when I said the state doesn't track ownership? That is entirely true, but they do track what's called governing authority. If you have a member-managed LLC, adding a member means you're adding a new governing person, so you have to file a certificate of amendment, which is known as Form 424. If you have a manager-managed LLC and you are adding a new manager, you also file Form 424. But here's the catch. If you have a manager-managed LLC and you're just bringing on a new member who will simply own a piece of the company but won't manage it, you don't need to file Form 424 at all. It's purely an ownership change which stays perfectly private inside your operating agreement.
Now, if you determine that you do in fact need to file Form 424, the standard filing fee with the Secretary of State is $150. You can file it easily online via the SOS Direct portal or just mail it in. Look, bureaucracy can be a real headache, so the relief of not having to waste money on unnecessary filings is huge. If you file a Form 424 when you don't actually need to, like if you're just changing an address, which is way cheaper on Form 401, you are literally tossing money out the window. That being said, if you're in a rush to get a legit amendment processed, the state does offer expedited service for an extra $25, which generally bumps your processing time up to the very next business day.
And if you are filing Form 424, there is a very specific, fairly recent legal nuance you need to know about so your paperwork doesn't just get rejected. A Texas law, SB 1203, actually changed who has the authority to sign these amendments. It used to be that an attorney could just sign on behalf of the company, but now the law explicitly states that an attorney can no longer sign a certificate of amendment unless they are also an active officer, manager, or member of that LLC. So you, as the authorized manager or managing member, are going to need to be the one to sign on the dotted line.
Section 3. The Public Information Report. So you've navigated Form 424, but there's another crucial state-level requirement involving the Texas Controller.
Even if you skipped Form 424 because you were just making a simple private ownership change, your new company's structure doesn't stay hidden forever. The state is going to find out eventually during your annual franchise tax filing. Every single year, by May 15th, your LLC is required to file a Public Information Report, or PIR, directly with the Texas Comptroller. And this is the actual mechanism by which your governing changes eventually become part of the public record. This PIR filing applies to LLCs, corporations, and limited partnerships, but what you actually have to report depends entirely on your structure, and this is a massive point regarding your privacy. If your LLC is member-managed, you have to list the names and addresses of all your members on this report every single year. But if your LLC is manager-managed, you only have to list the managers. Think about what that means. In a manager-managed structure, you can add or remove underlying members in your private operating agreement all day long, and their names never have to appear in the Comptroller's searchable public database. It is a fantastic privacy shield if you set it up correctly.
Section 4. IRS Rules and Tax Status. We've covered the internal and state levels, so now it's time to navigate the federal maze with the IRS.
The very second you add a member to an LLC, it triggers a profound federal tax shift. Under IRS Revenue Ruling 99-5, if you're a single-member LLC, you're treated as a disregarded entity for tax purposes. That just means the business income flows straight through to your personal tax return on a Schedule C. But the second you add another member, the IRS automatically shifts your tax classification. By default, you immediately become a multi-member LLC, which is taxed as a partnership, and that is a completely different ballgame. You now have to file a complex, completely separate partnership tax return known as Form 1065, and you have to issue Schedule K-1s to each member so they can report their share of the income.
So naturally, you're probably wondering, is there any way around this? Well, if you live in Texas, you're in luck. Because Texas is a community property state, there is a very specific exception. If your new LLC member is your spouse, and you two file your federal income taxes jointly, you can actually elect to treat the LLC as a disregarded entity or a qualified joint venture. This is huge because it allows married couples in Texas to bypass the entire administrative headache of filing that complex Form 1065 partnership return and just keep reporting their business income on their joint 1040 Schedule C.
Now, another incredibly common area of confusion. Do you need a new employer identification number, or EIN, when your membership changes? Let's clear this up right now. If you are going from a single-member LLC to a multi-member LLC, the IRS usually demands that you get a brand new EIN because your tax classification is fundamentally changing from disregarded to a partnership. However, if you are already a multi-member LLC and you're just swapping out one partner for another, or maybe just changing their ownership percentages, you do not need a new EIN.
Section 5. Updating the responsible party. Let's move to a critical requirement that is shockingly easy to overlook, but can cause major issues if ignored.
You see, every EIN issued by the IRS is securely attached to what they call a responsible party. The IRS defines this responsible party as the individual who ultimately owns, controls, or directs the entity's funds and assets. Basically, they are the person the IRS holds accountable for the LLC's tax obligations. So when you add a member, especially if that new member is taking over management or control of the business, the responsible party for the LLC might actually shift.
And if the responsible party for your LLC does change, you are instantly on the clock. You have a strict deadline of exactly 60 days from the date of the change to notify the IRS. You do this by filing IRS Form 8822-B. Fun fact, this is also the exact same form you use if the business changes its mailing address or physical location. Filing this one-page form is completely free, it takes maybe 10 minutes, and it ensures that all your critical tax correspondence actually makes its way to the right person in your new partnership setup.
Section 6. Important legal disclaimer. We have covered a ton of ground today, so before we wrap up, let's do a quick, mandatory safety check.
Everything we've discussed today provides a really comprehensive, educational roadmap for understanding the mechanics of expanding a Texas LLC. However, please remember, this is not tailored legal or tax advice. Every single business is unique, and corporate structuring can get highly complex very quickly. You should always consult with a qualified business attorney and a tax specialist before executing these changes to ensure your specific business needs and liabilities are fully protected.
Expanding your LLC by bringing on a new member is a massive step forward for your business. By structuring your internal operating agreement correctly, smartly managing your state filings like Form 424 in the PIR, and keeping the IRS happy with proper tax classifications and EIN updates, you are building a rock-solid foundation for growth. You've navigated the internal, state, and federal hurdles literally like a pro. So, with your Texas LLC fully compliant and safely expanded, what will your next big business milestone be? Keep building, keep growing, and I'll see you in the next explainer.